Welcome to the Explorer Poet Podcast, an exploration of the blurry line separating our physical world from our abstract realities. Conversations and stories, myths and reality, science and the gods we worship, the esoteric and the everyday. Come explore with me. Aaron Balick, welcome to the Explorer Poet Podcast.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I came across your work through the LABRC, the London Arts-Based Research Center, which they do this great, I think it's monthly that they do it, but they do this great series called Indelible Evenings. And I came across the conversation that you had there, or kind of it's like a presentation series, and hosted by Rula Marie Dibb. And she was on my podcast about just over a year ago. But anyways, I came across your work through that series, and you were talking about some really interesting things. So you seem like a very prolific person. You're obviously a writer. You write books. You have a blog. I believe you've recently started a Substack.
That's right. This week.
Oh, just this week. Okay. I was perusing your website and I saw that. So, and then you also you've written for major publications, Wired, and you have a column in GQ, or you contribute to GQ. And also, I think you also do some consulting around businesses and organizations. So you do all these different things, but it seems like the kind of the thread that like puts them all together or sews them together is your work and experience as a psychoanalyst in kind of the depth psychology space. And so I kind of want to start there, and I usually ask people this question: what got you originally interested in depth psychology? Kind of what drew you to it, and then kind of what was your path in pursuing it?
Okay. It wasn't one of those things that I knew from a very early age. In fact, I did a lot of farting around for a while before I kind of found my path. But I'm here in the UK. I'm originally from the States. I came over as a foreign exchange student my final year at university, and I pretty much stuck around after that. And I became I was teaching English as a foreign language in Poland. I lived in France for a little while. And basically, I needed a visa to stay in the UK with my partner. And the best and easiest way to do that at the time was to do a master's degree. So I did that in continental philosophy just because it was interesting. And I was 25 at that stage. And that's when I read Freud for the first time. And it really just blew my mind. I had all of the presuppositions that everybody else has about Freud, which now I spend a lot of my time trying to change people's minds about. And there was just something so amazing to me about the way this guy's mind worked and what he was looking at and what he was discovering, that just by that happenstance, once I finished that master's degree, I thought, I want to do this and I want to apply it. I want to become a psychotherapist. And I started my training the very following year.
Okay, awesome. Was there something specific about the way that he viewed things that really connected with you?
Yeah, just before you hit the record button, you were telling me about this Shackleton fellow, right? This kind of exploring the Arctic. And, Freud was an explorer of the unconscious, and he took some really incredible professional risks, really, in what he was trying to say. And obviously got a lot wrong, but the stuff that he got right and the way he spoke about those things just really, his desire to find out the answers. And, any human being wants to know what the meaning of life is about, or the meaning of their life, or, why we do the things that we do. And that was just a door that opened where I thought I can spend my life trying to work out the finer details of what makes people tick on the level of the psyche. So I don't know how it didn't occur to me before that would be of great interest, because as soon as it became obvious, it was like, yeah, that's how I want to spend my life, just looking deeper and deeper into that.
Yeah, I can really relate to that because I came from a background that was very religious, and it was very literal, like very literalized. And so everything was very black and white. And at some point I realized that this isn't it's not working for me. And it was around then, I think I always had that same desire to like really understand what was going on. But once I lost my religion, I had the same impulse to just figure it out. Like, why do people think the way that they think? Why do people behave the way that they behave? And why is it that the thing that kind of structures it all for us is just these stories that get layered on top of each other? Why is that? And I've had a couple of guests recently who are exploring that from a biological perspective or an evolutionary perspective, and I think
Hmm.
it's very fascinating to me that this is the operating system that somehow we've adapted.
Yeah, or maybe fail to adapt in some ways too, right?
Yeah,
It
yeah,
seems.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and the world's definitely changed, which makes it more and more difficult for us to feel adapted, which is actually, kind of what I wanted to talk to you about, because you do a lot of thinking and writing and speaking on technology and the effect of technology on our psyche. And I mean, it's almost shocking how long we've had social media now, because there there was a time, like the majority of my life, I didn't have social media. And now I'm getting to a point where I really don't remember life before the technology that we have and the kind of the interconnectedness that we have. Um, and you wrote a book called The Psychodynamics of Social Media, and it's coming up on almost a decade since that was
Yeah.
published. And so that's really interesting. But now it's almost as if we have this next phase of technology that's going to be the next big thing in artificial intelligence. And so I would love to just spend some time picking your brain on what this is going to mean, and what's already happening, and then what it's also going to mean for us as a species and as a, I don't know, as a collective. So how do you, first of all, from a technology perspective, how far along do you think we are in this artificial intelligence experiment? And I don't know, what do you see happening right now, just from a technology perspective, and then hopefully we can tie that into psychology as well.
Okay. Can I say one thing about psychology first to kind of
Yeah,
tie it
yeah,
into that
yeah. If you
answer?
need, yeah, I think context would
Yeah,
be great. So go ahead.
because I think it'll help frame the conversation, so you'll kind of have a sense of where I'm coming from when I answer these questions. When I wrote, it's actually just over a decade now. It was published in 2014, but when I wrote the book, people were saying, "Oh, this book is going to be out of date like next year." Already social media is changing and technology changes so fast. And I'm actually kind of proud of the way I framed the book, because I future-proofed it in a sense by by taking the idea that human psychology actually is pretty much the same as it's been for 100,000 years or 150,000 years. And it's been confronted with different challenges, whether that's hunter-gatherer to agrarian society, or, big cities, or industrialization, all that kind of stuff. All of our successes and failures to adapt to that kind of stuff has to do with how our basic psychology, that's pretty much, as old as we are as cognitive beings, makes sense of the world that it's in. So that kind of makes it easier. Like when you start to apply those ideas to the technologies that change very quickly, you can always find your way home by asking what human beings need, what human beings are always searching for, what makes that difficult, what makes that easy. So that's kind of like the back. Our psychology is the same, the context is different, and that's really consequential, right? So so where we're going, one of those basic psychological mechanisms, on the one hand, is the uh, motivation to relate and attach to other people, like how relating to others is a fundamental requirement, as much as food and water and shelter. We're social animals, and we do very badly if we're not social. And also, we all have egos, and we all have a degree of narcissism, and we like to see ourselves reflected back to us in the world. And where I see technology going now, when I wrote the book, I saw mostly how social media was facilitating, in both positive and negative ways, that relational quality, because it was fundamentally relational, and how it also spoke to that narcissistic quality. But in 2025, I mean, even social media isn't particularly social anymore. It's a lot more about content consumption. So even that relational bit is gone. We didn't have the algorithms that we had back then. So these like really smart algorithms that kind of show us more and more of what we're looking at, which kind of make us double down on the identifications we're making and how we see ourselves in the world and how we see other people. And now with AI, it's happening even faster in a much more sophisticated kind of way, because even the information that you're getting is being constructed, with a lean into some algorithms that are passive, right? That are just going around pulling stuff together that goes together, or trying to replicate stuff that you've seen before, but also manipulative. There are bad actors out there who are manipulating the algorithms to sow polarization, right? And to spread false information. And because our basic psychology, particularly when it comes to large numbers, and particularly like actually large numbers of people that you're engaging with, but also large numbers in your head, like, numbers bigger than 10, we're kind of stupid in really important ways, right? It's hard for us to feel empathy for cultures and people across the world that we don't know about, right? It's hard for us to see the humanity in a avatar on a social media network. It's easy for us to feel afraid and hateful when we're told stories, that confirm the other as bad. So the weaknesses in our psychological structure are also kind of being amplified by a lot of the social technologies, the digital technologies that we're working across.
Yeah. It is interesting that kind of it's almost like an arc or like a shift from social media. I mean, the first social media I ever had, I remember. So way back in the day, I served an LDS mission in South Korea. And so I came home in 2007. And when I got home, I had never heard of Facebook. I had never heard of YouTube. I had never heard of MySpace. And I remember everybody was on these social networks. And I was asking, like, what is this? What's going on? And I was so out of the loop that I remember asking my friend if they were on, instead of saying, and I kind of mixed them up and I said, "Are you on my face?" Because I was just
Right.
so unaware, right? Are you on my face? But you're right. Back then, it was all about just connecting with people who you knew in the real world, and then it was just like sharing content from your day, sharing things you liked, music, images, photos, whatever. And it gradually shifted to this thing where if you follow somebody on social media, you might never see their content, even though you follow each other. And then because of the algorithms, all the algorithms drive me crazy because I don't want to be swept up in content. I want to, if I'm connected with certain people, I want to actually see what they're saying. But then the other thing that the algorithms do is, and we were just having this conversation with our kids, is that when you go online, you have to realize that the experience you're having is not the same experience that anybody else is having online. It's
Yeah.
all curated to you. And so it's almost like if there was a period in my life where I smoked a lot of weed, and I had to get to a point where I realized, like, oh, I'm the only one that's high. Like nobody else is high. And I had to get over that. Like I had to get past the weed thing, but also like that's what it's like being on the internet, is you have to realize, like, oh, nobody else is experiencing what I'm experiencing. And then to couple that with artificial intelligence and this idea that whoever's controlling the algorithm now has this resource to create infinite content that keeps you captured from an attention perspective, but also captured from an ideas or information perspective. It's scary. And I think one of the things, I mean, the world feels pretty crazy right now. Feels like there's a lot going on, geopolitically, economically, And I think that you're right. Like the information that it shares with specific people kind of keeps them trapped or scared in the silo that they're afraid of right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And those
Yeah, and those sites.
silos, they're really dangerous because there's a paradox in the thing that you said before, like I'm the only one that's high here. On the one hand is true, but on the other hand, the algorithms clump people together based on group identities that kind of wash over the nuance and differences between them. And that's happening on every level, like from mental health diagnoses to racial and ethnic background to gender and politics, where, across all of these different spheres, even if you really, could objectively appreciate all the differences, right? Transgenerationally and economically and ethnically and religiously, I still think we have more in common than we have difference, like across the whole board. But I feel like we're now in a situation where even like micro differences, it's like you can't understand me unless you have my experience, right? Or those of us who share a nominal experience, we're all the same. And then you start to feel like there's something wrong with you if you share that experience, but not on every single level. You like, because then it's not really a good fit. So really, it's fragmenting everyone into these kind of identity categories that are not particularly nuanced, not particularly complex, making it harder for people to reach across. And, it didn't have to be that way. You can imagine algorithms that, kind of integrated different perspectives so that in a way that you had to look at stuff that you didn't agree with or that challenged your ideas about stuff. You really have to work hard to find that these days. And you got to do it like voluntarily, right? It's not going to happen to you. You've got to be in a position to say, well, I want to expose myself to different ideas that might make me uncomfortable or where I might find out that I'm wrong. And that's not a particularly massive human trait. We tend to avoid that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that, going all the way back to our psychology conversation at the beginning, that like it seems like that's programmed into us anyways to try to find people who agree with us, because then you feel safe. Yeah. And the internet could have been this thing that allowed the entire world to see, like you're saying, that we're all more similar than we are different. Sure, we live in different environments, we have different contexts, but deep down we're all human. And so we all kind of have the same desires for friends and family, meaningful work, being able to, I think most people just want to be able to barbecue with their family on the weekend. It's actually pretty simple. So
at the base of that,
yeah,
the base of the barbecue is this really simple term that's really complicated in its psychological birth, but it's recognition, right? Basically, what everybody really, really wants is to be recognized for who they are, kind of not necessarily completely, but kind of in a whole kind of a way, right? Like not just the image, and not that this happens in a barbecue, but when you're having a barbecue with close friends and family, they kind of get you, and you have your arguments and you have your conflicts and you don't agree on everything. But ideally, you're in a situation where people kind of see you for who you are. And the great paradox in this kind of social networking world is that what we really want is kind of authentic recognition. But what that world delivers is superficial level validation, likes and follows and comments and, kudos. And it just doesn't do the trick, but we get addicted to it. I call it like the fast food kind of relationships, and it's fine if you have a varied diet, right? Then you can have your occasional donut and a hot dog. And they're really good. But if you're only eating donuts and hot dogs, you get unwell. And a relational diet is a lot more donuts and hot dogs than it is hearty salads. And it's not a very healthy social environment to be in, especially because hot dogs and, well, for me, maybe for you, hot dogs and donuts taste good, right? So it's like you're drawn to them.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good analogy because social media can feel the same where if you've gone a long time without having a hot dog or a donut and you eat it, you can go, "Oh my God, this is so good. This is delicious." And social media is the same where if you take a break from it and you come back to it, that initial dopamine hit can give you like this, "Oh wow, this is really interesting.
Mm,
I'm curious," or you get drawn into it. But if you eat hot dogs and donuts every day, it gets to a point where you feel like, well, in your body, you just feel terrible. You feel
yeah.
sluggish. You're starting to put on weight. You just don't feel good. And social media does the same thing. It just kind of drags you down over time.
Yeah, and people are noticing, right? I mean, that whether you're doom scrolling, you're just spending too many, hours on it, doesn't feel good. But the addictive quality of it kind of keeps us going, even when it doesn't feel good.
Yeah, it's funny because if you scroll social media, you get into that doom scroll. At some point, you're going to start seeing, at least on my algorithm, I see maybe like, I don't know what percentage, but you start to see a high percentage of posts that are literally telling you to stop doom scrolling.
Yeah.
It's this a huge irony of like, yeah, the people who are posting enough to for the algorithm to pick them up are then telling the people who are watching it, you just put the phone down and go do something else.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. So, when it comes to artificial intelligence, then how much time do you spend actually looking into the technology and the advancements and kind of where we are now? Is that a big part of your, I don't know, your efforts in understanding it? Do you have a good
Yeah.
grasp around the technology today?
I mean, next to a developer, no, I don't have a good grasp of it. I have a relatively intelligent layperson's grasp of it. So I try to understand it enough so that I can talk about it in a truthful way through my lens of psychology, right? So, um, and I do have friends and colleagues who work in that sector, so I can find out, if I get something right. In fact, I did like a big talk about AI in therapy, and I had a friend of mine who works at Google in AI, attend it, and I was terrified that I was going to say something absolutely, that she would know everything. Uh, and she said, that generally it was all right what I said. So, um, what I need to understand enough that I can say something of value that has to do with our relationship to that mechanism. Yeah. I would love to know more, but given the limits in time, you just have to get as close as you can to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So where we are now with AI being built on large language models or LLMs, I I um I don't I'm probably in the same boat. Like I'm not a developer, I'm not a coder. I don't know the technical intricacies of how it's being developed. But from a perspective of moving towards something like artificial general intelligence, do
Mhm.
you do you feel like that's the track we're on? Do you feel like we're actually moving towards something that is going to be able to think in a way even similar to humans, or are we on some other trajectory?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different opinions on this. My gut sense is that it's probably coming faster than we would expect it to come, um, which is a little bit scary. And, you know, it's funny because when you talk to the developers about it, and I've gone to some, developer events and developer conferences to see if I can get my head around what they're saying and doing. And to them, there's a black box also with AI, right? Like they know what they're building, but nobody can actually explain what goes on between an input and an output and say exactly what happened, right? So when you ask an LLM a question, yes, you can say what how that's coded and what theoretically happens to that, but nobody can actually predict what it's going to say when it comes out the other side, or when it comes out the other side to reverse engineer how it came up with that answer, which I think is really interesting and a little bit spooky, right? So like we as a human race have created something that on some fundamental level we can't understand granularly, even the people that have created it. So any other thing, like there's like actual general artificial intelligence, and there is the performance of intelligence, which is kind of what we have now. And in some ways it matters, but in another way it kind of doesn't matter, because our projection onto it is as if it's already human, as if it already has the answers, and that's already problematic, right? So what happens with AGI, or I think even more interestingly, if it ever achieves sentience, which I think is actually a much more interesting philosophical situation, who knows? That seems much further off. But it also seems to be like, if you can solve the problem of getting enough power and getting enough hardware, it's really just a matter of those kinds of things. You know, a big enough computer with enough memory that's got enough power, you'd get there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because the human brain is so much more efficient than any of the computers that we've been able to come up with. We can process so much more with so much less energy. But I think the way that technology advances, they're going to get better and better at processing with less.
Well, if quantum computing
input,
happens, for example, I mean,
yep.
that just like throws everything.
Yeah.
You know?
Speaking of things that we've developed that we don't actually understand.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit more about the projection side of it. So because I think I experienced this where I type something and it can come, like I type something into, say ChatGPT or Grok, or even now when you search on Google, a lot of times Gemini just comes up as a result, the Gemini prompt. Yeah, talk to me a little bit more about that projection, that experience of thinking it's one thing when maybe it's not.
Yeah. So, it's another one of these, you could see it as a flaw or benefit in, the human psychological development, but our capacity to anthropomorphize things, right? So, to see it, to imagine the humanness of something. And we're really familiar with this in what we call transitional objects, which are things that you have when you're a baby. We know normal people know them as teddy bears and stuffed animals. Psychologists call them transitional objects, which is kind of a way that you imbue a fluffy animal with a sentient quality in that transition away, and to kind of independence, your dependence on your primary caretakers, your mother, your father, whoever you're brought up with, and then you kind of transfer that into an object that sits with you when they're not there. And then you can put the object down and be on your own. So you actually don't need something that even appears to be human to have real feelings towards it. Like all of us grown-ups, let's say most of us grown-ups now know that we probably did actually love our stuffed animals, but we also know that they did not actually love us back, right? The feelings of love towards the stuffed animal are real and were real, but it's not reciprocated. Now that we're adults and we're having these performances of humanity that are so accurate, they're pretty much passing the Turing test every day now, right? So, you ask questions, you get answers, you can kind of guess a lot of the time. So I don't know if we've officially passed Turing test. I think probably. It really fools us to imbue it with an idea. And then when you throw in the algorithms, and this is where, and who's constructing them and how are they rolling out, oftentimes they can be quite flattering, particularly people who are spending money on AI companions and that kind of thing, who's now collecting all of the data that you put into it, knowing you. For those that are just listening, there's air quotes there. They don't really know you. These are algorithmic calculations that are going on that make people feel seen. But they're not being seen because it's just like the stuffed animal, right? Just like it, except it's less cuddly, right? It's just like metallic or whatever, whatever it looks like out there in the cloud. Which is why sentience is another thing. I think sentience is interesting because then there would be something different from you, aware of itself, that's seeing you. And I think the film Her is a really good example of that. I think that's different from relationship with AI, but we are nowhere near that. And not only that, because it's such a low level of complexity, you're either talking to something or typing to something, And because it doesn't really fight back or impress upon you its difference from you as a romantic partner would, or a parent or a friend or a coworker, it also gets rid of all the grief that you get with other human beings, you know? So it's easier. So you can feel seen and liked, you can feel loved, you can have actual real feelings towards something that doesn't have any real feelings towards you. And then what happens when you go out into the real world and have to deal with the messy, brain-oriented human beings who are sometimes selfish, sometimes irritating, feel something differently from you, give you, unwanted feedback, all of it. It's trouble because that's something you need to get good at in life to maintain healthy relationships. And lots of technologies make it easier not to have to get good at that.
Yeah. Oh man, there's a lot in there. So the first thought that comes to mind is it must have been maybe 10 years ago. I was online and I must have been on Twitter at the time or something. And I was just looking at what people were saying. And, if you go to social media, especially a platform like Twitter or X now, people just speak so matter-of-factly about the way that things are. And I remember thinking, wow, this is like, it's like the internet is like this mirror. It's like this thing that's trying to mirror back to us what reality is. But it really was not reality. It's like two separate versions of reality. Like there's this world out here, like when you go, I always think about when you go to the grocery store, it's not like social media at all. Like nobody's mad at each other. Everybody at the grocery store, it doesn't matter your race, your gender, where you came from. Everybody's just polite to each other. They say excuse me, they smile at each other. It's just it's not an unpleasant place to go. Maybe in some neighborhoods, but I would say in the majority of places it's just fine. And so it's like the digital world doesn't actually do a good job of mirroring back the real world in a lot of ways. Another example would be just this weekend, we took our family to an amusement park here in Idaho. And we were walking around and my wife leaned over and she said, she's like, it was a really clean, nice, beautiful place. And so she was saying, this looks like the setting for like an Instagram account where somebody would go and post. But looking around at all the people, like it didn't look like Instagram. It was just regular people in regular clothing. A lot of them are overweight. It was cold and rainy a little bit that day, and so people's hair was, a little bit ruffled up, and it just wasn't, when you think about the internet, it's not actually a great reflection of the world we actually live in. Which is interesting because then what you're talking about is us projecting or anthropomorphizing this experience of AI as if it's like a teddy bear. And it's not, it's almost giving us what we want because of the same algorithm problem, but it's not, it's potentially not reflecting back even a useful or healthy version of ourselves.
Yeah. And here's the great paradox, right? So this is what I talk about in the book quite a bit, that so I think about people as being, that the digital world enables us to extend our psychological selves outwards, right? So when you've got a profile, whatever, you got a website, you've got a Twitter account, an X account, you go to bed at night, that's still there being interacted with the world. This is like this partial representation of you, extended out into the digital world. Now, the paradox is that whatever platform you're on turns on or turns off or enables or disables various psychological functions. And it depends on what the platform is, how it operates, the architecture of that platform, and the human being or human beings using it, right? So while on the one hand, you have a model where you can project human nature onto an AI, which can feel good. On the other hand, you can project a hateful aspect of yourself onto an idea of a person on X, right? So completely different, well, projection is still happening, but it's asking something different from you. Now, when you add scale into that and you add filter bubbles into that, this is why you have this hate-filled space. It appeals to the id part of us, right? The animalistic, aggressive part of us. It dehumanizes the other. So it asks the worst from us. It's like built in a way to ask the worst from it. And then if you're anonymous, it's even worse. If you take a particular position that's confrontational, it's worse. And then you go to your amusement park, right? Or your grocery store. And the difference there is that you have interpersonal complexity. So you have the reduction of interpersonal complexity on a social network, and then you have an increase of interpersonal complexity in the grocery store. Because if you're an asshole to somebody in the grocery store, there's going to be a direct consequence for that, right? Like approbation, you might get hit in the face. It might just be scary to say something like that or do something like that. There's interpersonal control mechanisms that are happening, right? That obviously not all the times, and there's some very violent societies and this stuff happens, but in general, it mitigates against acting out because there are direct consequences for it. In this virtual world, there aren't really direct consequences for it. And that's really a problem. Also, in the real world, no, it's all the real world happening in different spaces, right? But in the grocery store or in a country, you have a percentage of people who will have a personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, where they're just basically wired to be more likely to cause violent crime or be sociopathic, right? It's just like the 2% of the male population or something else, and these sociopathic qualities. You go online and it unleashes the sociopathic qualities in all of us, right? So we might not go out and kill somebody, but we kind of do the verbal equivalent online. So yeah, that was a very long answer to this. Like technology doesn't do one thing. It asks something of your psyche, depending on whether it's Instagram or X or Facebook or Zoom or Substack. They all ask something different from us.
Yeah, that idea of the personality disorder thing is also scary when it comes to kind of circling back to AI and sentience, because one of the things that I often think about with AI is it's like we're trying to build, or it's like we're trying to replicate the processes of our own mind in a way, or just trying to get to something that can do those processes or something similar to us, when in reality, most of us don't know ourselves that well. Even the folks who, I would imagine that the people who are coding the AI in these different companies, I would imagine they haven't spent a lot of time doing any kind of self-work, dream work, depth psychology. They really haven't integrated a lot of parts of themselves and become a whole person. I think, yeah, I don't know if there's a question there, but that's like one of the scarier things for me, is the idea that the AI itself could be coded in such a way that is intentionally, or not intentionally, but inherently narcissistic itself.
I mean, that is a big problem that has been kind of lobbed at Silicon Valley for a long time, just the nature of the demographic of the people there, who are largely men, largely white men who are developing the technologies that we all use, that, I think most of the time, without any, malicious intention or anything, just happen to include a perspective of a piece of technology that's going to be developed by a certain demographic, right? And then you look at something like AI, and there are like really good organizations and people and companies that are like trying to rectify this, and people are aware of this. But particularly the early versions were picking up their data and their knowledge, from sources that are like hardly diverse. I mean, I think ChatGPT's in its first iteration, something like, don't quote me on this as truth, but something like 60% of it, came from most popular upvotes on Reddit or something, right? So its data set was also coming from a very particular thing. And even now you go on, and because we happen to live in a society where most medical research is carried out on men and not on women, you have a disproportionate capacity to advise, on medical situations between the two. Since the canon, is largely written by white Europeans in English, right? You have an overrepresentation of that online. So that's where it really is a mirror, right? And we can become aware of that, and we can try to include it and make it kind of bigger than that. And I think it really ought to be. But when you approach it as kind of the arbiter of truth, which a lot of people do, and it's coming from very local perspectives, it's a pretty dangerous situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially like if it's using any kind of social information, like social media information as the data set. We've already been talking for a while here about how the algorithms skew all that information anyways. So it's almost like this scary self-perpetuating cycle. And
Yeah.
I've spent part of my career, like I worked in Silicon Valley for a little while, for a few years. And so I know a lot of people there, and they were all like in person, they're all good people. They're all just trying to do their job. But there's, when it comes to the developers, the coders, not that they're bad people, but just that they are inherently extroverted in a way where they connect with things and objects and ideas much more than they're able to connect with themselves and connect with other people. And yeah, it is kind of a I don't know. It's a fun time to be alive because we get to wait and see what the heck's about to happen.
Well, people get excited about their ideas, right? Which is no bad thing. But you pursue an idea without the kind of the guardrails of its consequence. This is how we ended up with nuclear weapons, right? It's kind of like we kind of knew it would be going that direction, but it's arguable that there is a necessity to go that way when two sides are against each other, and the first one to get there is gonna win. But the people that are involved in that just want to find, just like I got excited about Freud, it's less scalable and less evil in a sense, though it has been deployed to evil, purposes. But people just want to find things, developers just want to find out if they can develop stuff. What happens to that comes next. And we don't have any regulation around that sort of thing, and less of it because of the way the political situation is going. So, those are we need to have some guardrails, and they're very difficult to find at the moment.
Yeah. And that argument for the arms race, or, they throw out the idea of China. What if China develops it first? And that's just a very, just like you said, with nuclear weapons, AI, anything. And when it comes to like genetic manipulation, any kind of thing that's coming, that's scary, that probably should have guardrails. There's always that argument that, well, what if somebody else does it first? And it kind of just knocks it all out of the way. Circling. Oh, go ahead.
So I can't think what it's called. There's a book called like Our Last Invention or something similar to that, where he says what's more dangerous about moving towards general artificial intelligence is that uranium comes with its own guardrails. Right? Like it's really hard to make. It has to be kept in a particular way. There's all sorts of reasons that it guards itself. But if somebody in a dark closet anywhere in the world would produce general artificial intelligence, then it would basically have the knowledge of the world on its side and be able to see everything coming on the human side, and just immediately takes control, right? It just needs a wire. It just needs a Wi-Fi. If that happens, you can't contain it. It's just kind of done.
Yeah, and it never sleeps, and it's always working on something.
And it's getting smarter like every second. It's getting exponentially smarter, trying something, learning from it,
Yeah. It's scary. It'll be interesting. It would be fantastic if we could create it in a benevolent way, such that, I don't know, well, first that we would actually understand what's happening, but then also be able to trust that it was going to be on our side in some way, even if
that's why kind of like I love that movie Her so much, because I think it actually becomes transcendent, right? It not only becomes sentient, but it surpasses us in a really beautiful way. There's no indication that it then goes on to help us so that something changes for us. It just kind of goes its own way. But you would wonder, like, okay, if it could get that smart, then hopefully it could divine all of the bullshit that we're, putting online. It could also see the heart that also exists in human beings and, make that distinction and lean into that. It's a bit optimistic, but, why not be a possibility?
Yeah. Almost in a way, the things that we all struggle to do ourselves, if our technology could actually do it, and then it could be, wouldn't that be amazing if that was the mirror, if that was the thing reflecting back at us?
Mm.
Yeah. The thing I wanted to circle back on is the idea of sentience. And you brought up the Turing test earlier. And I think it has been, the Turing test was this idea from probably around World War II time with, what was it? Was it Arthur Turing? What was his name? I don't know if
Oh God, now I've lost it.
Let's call him Mr. Turing. Yeah, Mr.
Yeah.
Turing.
It'll come after the podcast.
Yeah, he had this idea that at some point you wouldn't be able to tell whether you're interacting with a machine or a human, and that's the test of whether or not it had achieved artificial intelligence or general intelligence. And it seems now that the Turing test has been passed many, many times, but we still kind of argue that we're not at AGI yet. We're not there yet, even though the Turing test is kind of behind us. And I was listening to a podcast recently. Really, the only tech or business podcast I listened to is All In with a bunch of Silicon Valley guys. And they were just this week, they were talking about how the term artificial general intelligence, or AGI, it doesn't get thrown around as much as it used to. And a lot of the companies that are doing AI, they're leaning more into the term super intelligence. And so I guess it is an interesting question of how do we know when it's achieved certain states, and what are those states? How do we know when it's achieved some kind of super intelligence or some kind of sentience? I don't know, maybe that's a better term, sentience, because that's the one that you brought up. But how do you think about that? Like, how do you think about what is sentience, and how do we test for it? How do we know when it's achieved it?
Yeah. So I think, and again, I would have to check my understanding completely. I think artificial general intelligence is kind of like thinking, right? And where super intelligence, includes this kind of sentience element to it. And we don't really have thinking. We have the illusion of thinking. So I think thinking is already kind of interesting. And it fools us, that's why it's kind of dangerous at the moment, because you think your AI is thinking, but it's really just doing complex maths and throwing words together that fit together. Sentience in human beings requires an other, right? Your ego does not develop except in relation to differentiation between the self and the other. That's why relationships are so important, because it's a process that continues throughout life. So in order for super artificial intelligence to be sentient, I feel like it would have to be embodied in some kind of a way, because without a boundary and without really, maybe it doesn't need, maybe there's another way in which it doesn't need a body, because something that would be dialogic with something it kind of saw as something other and different from it would also do the job. So it's not only self-awareness, it's self-awareness that grows from realizing that there's something else out there. The human baby thinks it is the whole world when it comes into the world. It doesn't know, objects come and go. It's just kind of like this, 18-month acid trip where everything is an extension of yourself until, the coming and going of the familiar mother you start to piece together. Oh, she goes away and she comes back to, oh, that's the same person. Oh, I must be different. This isn't happening in a cognitive kind of a way, but a realization, I'm an ego. And actually, Freud has a really beautiful metaphor for this. He says that the ego develops like a callus against the world. So it's like, as you rub up against things that are different, the skin thickens, in response to that. And our ego is the callus between our internal world and our external world. So to have sentient technology, there has to be a recognition of an external world.
Yeah,
and
that makes well, it just makes sense to me, because again, the way you're talking about childhood development, and when I look at children or anything I've read about children, I was reading this Piaget book, and he talks about how there's these three phases where, like what you're saying, that 18-month acid trip. I actually, it's funny that you say it that way because I think of it similar. Um, there's a phase where the child is looking just to look. It doesn't know it doesn't know that there are these external objects, so it's just looking to look. And then there's a phase where the child is looking to see, where it's like recognizing, oh, there are these things out there and they come and go, like you're saying. And then eventually you get to a point where you're looking to act. And that's when you've kind of, your body is now, you're intentionally interacting with the outer world. And this other idea so like one challenge that I have with standard education is that kids have to sit at a desk all day. And it's so counterintuitive because children actually need their bodies to learn. So they can't learn except through the inputs of their bodies, because that's, in a sense, that's what our bodies are. We're these input sensors.
Mm-hmm.
So and in the same way, how could artificial intelligence really reach some kind of sentience unless it's actually experiencing the world? Because, like you're saying, it's just mathematical formulas that are processing data, but it's not actually touching anything. It's not smelling anything. It's not having its heart broken by anything.
But you wouldn't hear the real twist, I think. And
Yeah,
it's a real twist for me, because I'm kind of like, I'm not sure where I am with it, but it seems entirely plausible. And some philosophers think so as well. We could be that. We could be a very highly sophisticated that, we could be in a simulation right now. It's just that it includes things like physical sensation, emotion. You just imagine the Sims, like really highly, highly evolved. And to kind of reflect back on our earlier conversation, if you had the quantum computers, you could easily create a simulated world that feels very, very real. And in this twist model, you and I and all the people that we interact with are also just stringing experiences. We're LLMs, right? It's just that there's also emotion, visceral experience, sleeping, waking. There may be no free will, but it feels like it. It could be, you're responding to the things I'm saying just based on your previous experience. You're not like actively choosing each word you say, nor mine, or they're just kind of coming out of your mouth. So yeah, we could be very, very sophisticated algorithms ourselves, living in a simulation, feeling like we're sentient, and we might not be. Which I think is plausible. And I'm going to forget someone else's first. It's Alan Turing came to me. I think it's Chalmers, Alex Chalmers, maybe I got his first name wrong, who talks about it being more likely that we're in a simulation than not, because you only need one culture to produce a really good simulator, to have lots and lots of simulations in very few highly developed technological cultures.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the simulation theory, and I think about it every now and then because I do feel, so we have all these inputs, right? So we have our five senses, our five physical senses. And then we have our emotions, and we have like intuitions. But then even if I think about my thoughts, if I think about my thoughts enough, I realize that I'm not my thoughts. And in a real way, thoughts themselves are just another input. The difference that I see is that in my touch feels much more direct, like it's much more of a concrete input of like, this feels like what I'm touching. But my thoughts are just abstract inputs where my brain, some part of my mind is going, what if this happened? Or what if that happened? And what if we combine this? And it's just a bunch of what ifs.
It's internal sourced stimulus, right?
Yeah. I think about it as abstract inputs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then the question is, who's watching, who's listening, which I think is I know we're getting to, that's a very interesting philosophical, spiritual question. Why am I aware of anything?
Yeah. Who is the observer? It's very, I think about all these things all the time. I read a lot of books on it, and it's a very interesting idea that, and going along with the simulation theory, like you were saying, it only requires one civilization, one culture to create it, and then probabilistically, uh, it it's much more likely that we're in a simulation, because if one simulation is created, within that simulation you can create simulations, and so there's the potential for layered simulations,
Layers and layers of simulations. Yeah.
infinite layered simulations, which is kind of funny to think about it that way, because of the way that I think about myth and story and symbols and all this stuff. um it still is kind of a way of kicking the can down the road, because I'm sure you've heard of that analogy of or that story of somebody ask it's old, but somebody asks, where does the universe exist, and somebody responds and says it's on the back of a giant turtle. And then the question is, well, where does that turtle exist? And so it's like turtles all the way down. And in a way, that's, it's a similar idea with the simulation theory. Well, maybe we're in a simulation, but who created that simulation? At some point, is it possible that at some point there is a reality?
But see, I would say a stimulation, like for instance, a simulation doesn't make it not reality, right? Because
Sure.
when
Yeah.
your father dies in in my simulation, it hurts, right?
Just
So
the same way that the internet is not reality. It's just a different place.
yes, at least we experience feelings in relation to it. And I think just that very basic question, why is it even, is enough to hold us for a very long, even if it's turtles upon turtles or simulations upon, there's no reason why we should be aware that anything is happening, and that we are is kind of really stunning, right? And that it's not just a rock, but could be like layers and layers of simulations from one culture that's highly developed. It's completely crazy,
Yeah, even when I was a religious person, because I was raised in a religion, even back then, when this idea of God was very concrete to me, I couldn't help but think, but it's impossible that we exist. Like, it's impossible that God exists. It's impossible that anything, but here I am, experiencing it, which is, it's just part of that constant search that people have always been on, that the exploration of that great mystery. And
Yes.
in a big way, I think that AI is a part of that. It's part of the evolution of us, and it's part of I guess, where we're headed, and hopefully it can help provide some answers. I don't know if it will, but hopefully.
Well, if there's that supreme culture out there who made us in our simulation, we're probably a mirror of it too, right? Because that's where we come from. So actually, in that really old-fashioned biblical style, made in God's image, there could be something. There could be something too. As you say, we don't know where in this fantasy of the original civilization comes from. That mirroring of whatever's going on is also kind of an interesting thing to ponder.
Yeah, which circles us all the way back to human psychology itself, and the way that we take our inputs and then kind of construct this understanding about what's going on around us. And since ancient time, it's been kind of a mirror of we experience the outer world, or interpret the outer world as a mirror of what's going on inside of us anyways. I read a lot of Joseph Campbell, and he talks about man, the microcosm, and speaking of the universe as a macrocosm, and then man as the microcosm, and then the city state or empire, whatever nation, country in the middle, he calls it the macrocosm. And it really is, whether it's technology or culture, religion, art, it seems like we do just want we just constantly want a mirror of ourselves, so that maybe we can better understand ourselves or something.
Yeah, let's hope we can use it well,
Yeah, absolutely.
better anyway.
Yeah. Well, Aaron, we are up just about an hour, so I want to give you back the rest of your late evening. I really appreciate your time. This is a lot of fun. If people want to find you, they want to find your work, I think you've got all sorts of stuff going on out there. Where can people go find you?
I guess the easiest is my website, which is simply aaronbalick.com, AARONBALICK. You can also find me on Blue Sky because I came off X. It was a little bit too toxic. And as you said, I'm on Substack as well. So I'm the only one with my name as far as I'm aware. So if you want to find out, just Google it and you'll find something.
Okay, awesome. And maybe just my last kind of funny thought, and I hope you think this is funny, but as a bald man with a beard, I'm not an aggressive person. I'm actually a really calm person, but sometimes people just inherently can be kind of a little scared of me. And your image online, you come across as a very for me, at least, when I first came across your image, I was like, oh, this guy's a little intimidating. But I want to say, in having a conversation with you, you're very pleasant, and it's been a lot of fun.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks,
From
Aaron.
one bald man with a beard to another.
Yeah. I wouldn't brought it up if I wasn't if I didn't have the same experience. So, yeah. Thank you so much, Aaron. I appreciate it.